What happens when two elite soldiers underestimate the quiet woman standing in front of nearly 300 Navy SEALs? What they thought would be an easy demonstration turned into a lesson they'd never forget, one that would change how an entire military base viewed strength, respect, and the dangerous assumption that size determines capability. Sarah Chan had spent years perfecting her craft in silence, her 5'4" frame hiding skills that most people couldn't imagine. But on this particular morning at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, two arrogant instructors were about to learn why she was called the Silent Storm by those who knew her reputation. In less than 30 seconds, what started as humiliation would become legend, witnessed by some of the most elite warriors in the world. This is the true story of how one woman's response to public humiliation became the most talked about moment in modern military training history. Sarah Chen had always been different. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, she was the daughter of a Chinese immigrant father who owned a martial arts studio and an Irish mother who worked as a nurse. While other kids were playing video games or shopping at malls, Sarah spent her afternoons learning ancient fighting techniques that had been passed down through generations. Her father, Master Chen Wei, was strict but loving. He had immigrated to America with nothing but his knowledge of traditional Chinese martial arts and a dream of sharing these ancient teachings. His studio was small, tucked between a grocery store and a laundromat. But inside those walls, Sarah learned more than just how to fight. She learned discipline, respect, and the true meaning of strength. From the age of 5, Sarah practiced every day after school. While her classmates complained about homework, she was perfecting her stance, learning to channel her energy, and understanding the philosophy behind every movement. Her father taught her that true martial arts was not about showing off or intimidating others. It was about protecting those who could not protect themselves, and never using her skills unless absolutely necessary. Sarah was naturally small for her age, something that made her a target for bullies at school. But her father had taught her something important. The loudest person in the room is often the weakest, he would say. True strength whispers. So Sarah learned to be quiet, to observe, and to only act when action was truly needed. In high school, Sarah's reputation began to grow, but not in the way most people expected. She never started fights, never boasted about her abilities, and rarely even mentioned her martial arts training. But when Jake Morrison, a football player twice her size, cornered a younger student in the hallway and began pushing him around, Sarah quietly intervened. The confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds. Jake found himself on the ground, confused and embarrassed, while the younger student ran to safety. Sarah simply picked up her books and walked away as if nothing had happened. Word spread quickly through the school, but Sarah never talked about it. She had done what was necessary, nothing more. Her teachers began to notice something special about Sarah. She was focused in a way that most teenagers were not. While her classmates were distracted by social media and teenage drama, Sarah maintained a calm presence that was both comforting and mysterious. Her grades were excellent, but more than that, she seemed to possess a maturity that was rare for someone her age. During her senior year, a military recruiter visited the school. Sarah had never considered joining the military, but something about the presentation intrigued her. The recruiter spoke about service, about protecting others, and about pushing yourself beyond what you thought was possible. These were concepts that resonated with everything her father had taught her. That evening, Sarah sat with her parents to discuss the possibility of military service. Her mother was worried, as any parent would be, but her father understood. "You have been preparing for this your whole life," he said. "Not for war, but for service. Your skills are meant to protect others." Sarah decided to enlist in the Navy, drawn by their emphasis on honor, courage, and commitment. During basic training at Great Lakes Naval Station, she quickly stood out, but again, not in the way people expected. She was not the loudest recruit or the most physically imposing, but she had something that drill instructors rarely saw: complete mental discipline. Her fellow recruits initially underestimated her. Sarah was quiet during the first few weeks, observing the dynamics of the group, understanding who was who, and learning how to fit into this new environment. Some of the larger recruits made the mistake of thinking her silence meant weakness. During a particularly challenging obstacle course exercise, one recruit, Tommy Rodriguez, began making comments about how Sarah was slowing down the group. He was loud, boisterous, and convinced that his size and volume made him a leader. Sarah said nothing, but her drill instructor noticed the tension building. The next day, their drill instructor announced a special training exercise. It was supposed to teach them about underestimating opponents and the importance of respecting all members of their unit. Sarah was paired with Tommy for a basic defensive tactics demonstration. The drill instructor explained that Tommy would attempt to take Sarah down, and she would demonstrate proper defensive techniques. Tommy was confident grinning as he approached Sarah. He had 6 inches and 60 pounds on her, and he was sure this would be easy. The other recruits gathered around, many of them expecting to see Sarah struggle. But as Tommy lunged forward, something extraordinary happened. In one fluid motion, Sarah sidestepped his attack, redirected his momentum, and sent him tumbling to the ground. It was so quick and effortless that many recruits thought Tommy had simply tripped. But the drill instructor knew better. He had just witnessed a level of martial arts skill that he rarely saw, even among experienced military personnel. Tommy got up, embarrassed and angry. He demanded another chance, convinced that Sarah had just gotten lucky. This time, he approached more carefully, but the result was the same. Sarah moved like water, flowing around his attacks and using his own strength against him. After the third attempt, Tommy was breathing heavily, while Sarah looked as calm and composed as when they had started. From that day forward, Sarah's reputation in her unit changed completely. Her fellow recruits began to see her not as the quiet small girl, but as someone with extraordinary abilities. More importantly, they began to respect her leadership qualities. Sarah never boasted about her victories or made Tommy feel worse than he already did. Instead, she helped him understand what had happened and offered to teach him some basic techniques. After completing basic training with honors, Sarah was selected for advanced combat training. Her instructors were impressed not just with her fighting skills, but with her ability to teach and lead others. She had a natural gift for helping people understand complex techniques and for building confidence in those who struggled. During her advanced training, Sarah met Lieutenant Commander Jessica Martinez, a Navy officer who specialized in hand-to-hand combat instruction. Martinez had heard about Sarah's abilities and wanted to see them firsthand. What she discovered was someone with skills that went far beyond what most military personnel possessed. Martinez became Sarah's mentor, helping her understand how her martial arts background could be used to benefit the Navy. Sarah learned about military tactics, weapons training, and how to integrate her traditional fighting knowledge with modern combat techniques. More importantly, she learned about the responsibility that came with her abilities. Sarah's first assignment was to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, home to the Navy SEALs. She was brought in as part of a new program designed to improve hand-to-hand combat training for all personnel. Her job was to assist with demonstrations and help develop new training protocols that incorporated traditional martial arts techniques. When Sarah arrived at Coronado, she was struck by the intensity of the place. This was where some of the most elite soldiers in the world trained, and the atmosphere was unlike anything she had experienced. The base was filled with men who were used to being the strongest, the fastest, and the most skilled at everything they did. Sarah was assigned to work with the training division, where she would assist instructors in demonstrating various combat techniques. Her supervisor was Chief Petty Officer Mike Harrison, a veteran SEAL who had initially been skeptical about bringing in someone so young and inexperienced. But after seeing Sarah's credentials and speaking with Lieutenant Commander Martinez, he was willing to give her a chance. The first few weeks at Coronado were challenging for Sarah. Many of the personnel were not used to working with women in combat roles, and her quiet demeanor made some people question whether she belonged there. Sarah understood their skepticism and did not take it personally. She knew that she would have to prove herself, but she was confident in her abilities. Sarah spent her time learning about the base, understanding the training protocols, and observing how different instructors taught their classes. She noticed that while the physical training was excellent, there were opportunities to improve the hand-to-hand combat instruction by incorporating more traditional martial arts principles. During this observation period, Sarah also noticed the dynamics between different instructors and trainees. Most of the instructors were experienced and professional, but there were two who stood out for the wrong reasons. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson and Petty Officer First Class David Kruger were known for their aggressive teaching style and their tendency to humiliate trainees who struggled. Thompson and Kruger worked as a team, often using intimidation and public embarrassment as teaching tools. They believed that breaking people down mentally was just as important as physical training. Their methods were controversial, but they had been at Coronado for years and had developed a reputation for producing tough soldiers. Sarah had heard stories about Thompson and Kruger from other personnel. They were known for targeting anyone they perceived as weak or different. Several people had warned Sarah to be careful around them, but she had not yet had any direct contact with either instructor. That changed on a Tuesday morning in March, when Chief Harrison assigned Sarah to assist with a large demonstration that would be attended by nearly 300 Navy SEALs and other personnel. The demonstration was designed to showcase new hand-to-hand combat techniques and would feature several instructors demonstrating different fighting styles. Sarah was told that her role would be to assist with the demonstrations and possibly participate in some of the exercises. She was excited about the opportunity to show what she had learned and to contribute to the training program. What she did not know was that Thompson and Kruger had specifically requested that she be included in their portion of the demonstration. The night before the demonstration, Sarah practiced her techniques and reviewed the protocols she had been given. She wanted to make sure that everything went smoothly and that she represented herself and the Navy with honor. As she went through her forms in the empty training facility, Sarah felt a sense of calm and confidence. She had been preparing for moments like this her entire life. Chief Harrison had specifically told Sarah that the demonstration was an opportunity for her to show her skills and gain the respect of the personnel at the base. He believed that once people saw what she could do, the skepticism and doubt would disappear. Sarah appreciated his confidence in her and was determined not to let him down. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she thought about her father's teachings and the journey that had brought her to this point. She had always known that her path would be different from most people, but she had never imagined that it would lead her to this moment. Tomorrow, in front of nearly 300 of the most elite soldiers in the world, she would have the chance to prove that strength comes in many forms. What Sarah did not know was that Thompson and Kruger had been planning something special for her portion of the demonstration. They had been waiting for an opportunity to put the quiet little girl in her place, and they believed that public humiliation in front of so many people would be the perfect way to do it. They had underestimated many people before, but never someone quite like Sarah Chen. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear and cool at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Sarah arrived at the training facility early, as was her habit, to center herself and prepare mentally for what lay ahead. The large gymnasium had been set up with bleachers on 3 sides, creating an arena-like atmosphere that would soon be filled with nearly 300 Navy personnel. As Sarah went through her warm-up routine, she noticed the careful attention to detail that had gone into preparing the space. Mats had been arranged in the center, camera equipment had been positioned to record the demonstrations for training purposes, and the entire setup spoke to the importance of this event. This was not just a routine training exercise. It was a showcase of the Navy's combat training capabilities. Chief Harrison arrived shortly after Sarah, carrying a clipboard with the day's schedule and looking slightly stressed. The demonstration was a high-profile event that would be attended by senior officers from across the base, and everything needed to go perfectly. He had been planning this for months, and Sarah's participation was a key part of his vision for improving the base's training programs. "Ready for today, Chen?" Harrison asked, though the question was more rhetorical than anything else. He had complete confidence in Sarah's abilities and knew that she would represent the program well. Sarah nodded, her calm demeanor unchanged by the significance of the event. "Yes, Chief. I've reviewed all the protocols and I'm prepared for whatever you need me to do." Harrison smiled, appreciating Sarah's professionalism. Over the past few weeks, he had come to understand that Sarah was exactly what their program needed. Someone with exceptional skills, who could also communicate effectively with others. He had seen too many skilled fighters who could not teach, and too many good teachers who lacked the credibility that came from real ability. As other instructors began to arrive, Sarah noticed the atmosphere in the room shift. There was an energy and competitiveness that was typical of elite military units, but there was also an undercurrent of something else. Some of the instructors were eyeing her with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with what appeared to be barely concealed hostility. Thompson and Kruger arrived together, as they always did, carrying themselves with the swagger that came from years of intimidating recruits and junior personnel. Marcus Thompson was a large man, standing nearly 6 feet 4 inches tall, with a muscular build that spoke to years of intensive physical training. His shaved head and numerous tattoos gave him an intimidating appearance that he had cultivated carefully over the years. David Kruger was slightly smaller than his partner, but no less imposing. At 6 feet even, he had the lean, dangerous look of someone who had seen combat and was not afraid of anything. His cold blue eyes had a way of making people uncomfortable, and he used this to his advantage in his teaching methods. Both men had been at Coronado for over 5 years and had developed a reputation for being effective, if controversial, instructors. Their methods were old-school military: break people down completely and then build them back up stronger. They believed that the modern military had gone soft and that recruits needed to be toughened up through adversity and challenge. When Thompson and Kruger saw Sarah warming up, they exchanged a look that she did not notice but that several other instructors recognized immediately. It was the look they got when they had identified a target, someone they believed needed to be taken down a peg or two. They had been waiting for an opportunity to deal with Sarah ever since her arrival at the base. The problem, from Thompson and Kruger's perspective, was that Sarah represented everything they disliked about the direction the military was heading. She was young, she was female, and she had been brought in as part of a program that emphasized technique and skill over brute force and intimidation. To them, she was a symbol of the softening of military training. More troubling to them was the respect that Sarah had begun to earn from other personnel on the base. They had heard stories about her skills and had seen some of the junior personnel seeking her advice on combat techniques. This was unacceptable to them as it threatened their position as the primary authorities on hand-to-hand combat training. As the morning progressed, personnel began filing into the gymnasium. The bleachers filled quickly with Navy SEALs, training instructors, and other base personnel. The audience was impressive in its scope and experience. These were people who had seen combat, who understood what real fighting looked like, and who would not be easily impressed by flashy techniques that had no practical application. Sarah observed the arriving audience with interest. She had never performed in front of such a large group of elite military personnel, and she understood the significance of the moment. This was her opportunity to show that the skills she had learned could be valuable in a military context, and to prove that effective combat techniques could come from unexpected sources. Among the audience members were several senior officers, including Captain Robert Hayes, the commanding officer of the Training Division, and Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Williams, who was visiting from Navy Special Warfare Command. Their presence added to the importance of the event and meant that everything would be scrutinized carefully. Harrison called the instructors together for a final briefing about 30 minutes before the demonstration was scheduled to begin. He went through the schedule, reminded everyone about timing and safety protocols, and emphasized the importance of making a good impression on the visiting officers. Remember, this is about showcasing our capabilities and the improvements we've been making to our training programs, Harrison said. Each of you represents not just yourselves, but the entire training division. I want this to be professional, educational, and impressive. Thompson raised his hand. Chief, I'd like to suggest a modification to our portion of the demonstration. His voice carried the confidence of someone who was used to getting his way. Harrison looked at him with mild concern. Last-minute changes were never ideal, especially for such an important event. What kind of modification, Thompson? Kruger and I think it would be more effective if we demonstrated our techniques using Petty Officer Chen as our opponent, instead of each other, Thompson said smoothly. It would show the audience how these techniques work against different body types and skill levels. Sarah felt a slight shift in the energy of the room. Several of the other instructors glanced at her, then back at Thompson, and she could see the concern in their eyes. She understood immediately what was happening. Thompson was setting her up for public humiliation. Harrison hesitated. He knew Thompson and Kruger well enough to be suspicious of their motives, but he also understood that their suggestion was not entirely unreasonable. Demonstrations were more effective when they showed techniques being used against different types of opponents. Chen, are you comfortable with that? Harrison asked, giving Sarah the opportunity to decline if she felt unsafe or unprepared. Sarah looked directly at Thompson, then at Kruger, and finally back at Harrison. She understood exactly what they were trying to do, but she also knew that backing down would be seen as weakness by everyone present. More importantly, she was confident in her abilities and believed that this might actually be the opportunity she needed to establish her credibility once and for all. I'm fine with that, Chief, Sarah said calmly. Whatever serves the demonstration best. Thompson smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Excellent. I think the audience will find it very educational. The final preparations took another 20 minutes, during which time Sarah could feel the tension building. Word had somehow spread among the audience that the demonstration would include something unexpected, and there was an anticipatory energy in the room that had not been there earlier. As the official start time approached, Harrison took the podium to welcome the audience and introduce the day's activities. He spoke about the importance of hand-to-hand combat training, the innovations that had been implemented in recent months, and the caliber of instructors who would be demonstrating various techniques. Today's demonstrations will cover a range of combat situations and techniques, Harrison announced. Our instructors will show you practical applications of both traditional and modern fighting methods and how we're integrating these into our comprehensive training program. The first few demonstrations went smoothly. Various instructors showed techniques for disarming opponents, escaping from holds, and basic striking combinations. The audience was attentive and seemed impressed with the quality of the instruction. Sarah watched from the side, noting the techniques being demonstrated and mentally preparing for her own participation. When Harrison introduced Thompson and Kruger, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. These two were well known on the base, and their reputation preceded them. They strode onto the mat with confidence, acknowledging the audience with the casual authority of men who were used to being in control. Staff Sergeant Thompson and Petty Officer Kruger will be demonstrating advanced defensive techniques and how to handle multiple attackers, Harrison announced. They'll be working with Petty Officer Chen to show how these techniques apply against different opponents. As Sarah walked onto the mat, she was aware of the hundreds of eyes focused on her. The audience was curious, some were skeptical, and she could sense that many were waiting to see if she could hold her own against two of the base's most intimidating instructors. Thompson and Kruger had positioned themselves on opposite sides of the mat, creating a triangle with Sarah in the center. This was not the standard formation for the type of demonstration that Harrison had described, but before anyone could question it, Thompson began speaking to the audience. What we're going to show you today is how to handle an opponent who relies more on technique than strength, Thompson said, his voice carrying easily across the gymnasium. It's important to understand that in real combat situations, fancy martial arts moves are often ineffective against properly trained military personnel. Sarah realized immediately that Thompson was setting up a narrative that would make her look ineffective regardless of what happened next. By framing her skills as fancy martial arts moves, he was diminishing her credibility before the demonstration even began. Kruger picked up the narrative seamlessly. We've found that traditional military training and proven techniques are usually more reliable than exotic fighting styles, he said, his eyes fixed on Sarah. Today we'll show you why experience and proper training matter more than flashy techniques. Harrison frowned from his position near the podium. This was not what had been planned, and he could see that Thompson and Kruger were setting Sarah up for failure. But with nearly 300 people watching and senior officers in attendance, he could not stop the demonstration without causing a scene that would reflect badly on the entire program. Sarah understood that she was being set up, but she also recognized the opportunity that was being presented to her. Thompson and Kruger were so confident in their plan that they had made themselves vulnerable. They had announced to the entire audience that they did not believe her skills were effective, which meant that any success she had would be magnified by their own words. As the two men began to circle her slowly, Sarah centered herself mentally. She thought about her father's teachings, about the years of training that had brought her to this moment, and about the responsibility she had to represent her skills with honor. She had been underestimated many times before, but never quite like this. The key, Thompson continued, speaking to the audience while moving closer to Sarah, is to not be intimidated by an opponent's reputation or supposed skills. Most of the time, a direct approach is the most effective. Kruger nodded in agreement. Exactly. Don't overthink it. Use your size and strength advantages, and don't get caught up in trying to counter sophisticated techniques. Sarah remained still in the center of the mat, her breathing calm and controlled. She was aware of everything happening around her, the position of both men, the energy of the audience, and the growing tension in the room. Several people in the audience were beginning to realize that something was not quite right with this demonstration. Thompson made eye contact with Kruger and gave an almost imperceptible nod. This was their signal that the setup was complete, and it was time to execute their plan. They had positioned themselves perfectly, with Sarah isolated in the center, and the entire audience watching expectantly. What happened next would be talked about at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado for years to come. Thompson and Kruger had planned to humiliate Sarah in front of nearly 300 of the most elite soldiers in the military. Instead, they were about to learn why Sarah Chen had been called the Silent Storm by those who truly knew her capabilities. The demonstration that was supposed to end Sarah's credibility was about to become the moment that established her legend. The tension in the gymnasium was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah stood perfectly still in the center of the mat, her posture relaxed but alert, while Thompson and Kruger continued their slow circling. To the untrained eye, she might have appeared vulnerable, even nervous, but those with real martial arts experience could see something different in her stance and breathing. Among the audience, several people were beginning to feel uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a veteran with over 20 years of experience, leaned forward in his seat. He had seen enough combat to recognize when someone was being set up, and he did not like what he was seeing. "This doesn't look right," Rodriguez whispered to the officer sitting next to him. "They're not demonstrating techniques. They're hunting her." Lieutenant Commander Martinez, who had worked with Sarah during her advanced training, was also growing concerned. She knew Sarah's capabilities better than anyone else in the audience, but she also knew how dangerous the situation could become if Thompson and Kruger actually intended to hurt her. Chief Harrison, watching from near the podium, was torn between stopping the demonstration and allowing it to continue. He had complete faith in Sarah's abilities, but he was also responsible for the safety of all personnel involved. The last thing he wanted was for someone to get seriously injured during what was supposed to be an educational event. Thompson continued his commentary as he moved closer to Sarah. Now, when facing an opponent who's smaller than you, the key is to use your reach and strength advantages immediately, he said, his voice carrying across the silent gymnasium. Don't give them time to set up their techniques or find their preferred distance. Sarah remained motionless, but her eyes tracked both men constantly. She had assessed their movement patterns, identified their dominant hands, and noted the way they distributed their weight. Years of training had taught her to read opponents quickly and accurately, and she could see that both men were preparing for simultaneous attacks. Kruger picked up the narration. Exactly right. Most martial artists rely on timing and distance control. If you disrupt those elements early, you can neutralize their advantages. He was now close enough to Sarah that he could strike her without taking a step. The audience was completely silent now, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Many of the SEALs in attendance had combat experience and could feel the shift in energy that preceded violence. Several officers were leaning forward, ready to intervene if necessary. Thompson made his move first, but in a way that was designed to look accidental to the audience. As he continued his circular movement around Sarah, he suddenly stumbled slightly, as if he had lost his footing. This brought him directly towards Sarah, and he threw out his hands as if trying to catch his balance. But Sarah saw through the deception immediately. Thompson's stumble was perfectly controlled, and his hands were positioned to grab her shoulders and drive her backward. At the same moment, Kruger stepped forward from behind her, ready to catch her as she fell and complete the takedown that would humiliate her in front of everyone. The plan was simple and effective. Thompson would appear to accidentally knock Sarah off balance. Kruger would help by catching her, and together they would drive her to the ground in what would look like an unfortunate accident. Sarah would be embarrassed, possibly injured, and their point about the ineffectiveness of her skills would be made dramatically. What they had not counted on was Sarah's ability to read their intentions and react faster than either of them thought possible. As Thompson's hands reached for her shoulders, Sarah moved with a speed and precision that stunned everyone watching. Instead of trying to avoid his grasp, she stepped directly into it, catching his wrists and using his own momentum to redirect him. In one fluid motion, she pivoted on her left foot and sent Thompson flying over her hip in a perfect throw that sent him crashing into Kruger. The collision happened so fast that most of the audience initially thought it was part of the planned demonstration, but as the two large men untangled themselves from each other on the mat, it became clear that something had gone very wrong with their plan. Thompson was the first to get back to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and anger. The stumble that was supposed to have been controlled and believable had been turned against him, and he had ended up looking clumsy and ineffective. Worse, he had crashed into his partner, making both of them appear incompetent. Interesting technique, Thompson said, trying to regain control of the situation. Let's see how it works when you're facing a more direct approach. This time there was no pretense of demonstration or education. Thompson charged directly at Sarah, intending to tackle her to the ground with brute force. At the same moment, Kruger circled around to attack from her blind side, planning to grab her arms and hold her still while Thompson completed his takedown. It was a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm Sarah through sheer aggression and superior numbers. In their minds, there was no way someone her size could handle two large men attacking simultaneously with full force. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. As Thompson rushed toward her, Sarah remained perfectly calm. She had faced multiple attackers before in training, and she understood the principles that made such situations manageable. The key was not to fight both opponents simultaneously, but to use their own aggression and coordination against them. Instead of backing away from Thompson's charge, Sarah stepped forward and slightly to her right. This small movement changed the angle of his attack just enough to bring him directly into Kruger's path. As Thompson reached for her, Sarah ducked under his arms and pivoted, placing herself behind him just as Kruger arrived. The result was spectacular. Kruger, expecting to grab Sarah's arms, instead found himself grabbing his partner. Thompson, off balance from his missed tackle, collided with Kruger at full speed. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs, but this time, Sarah was not finished with them. As they fell, Sarah executed a move that demonstrated the difference between basic military combatives and advanced martial arts. Using a technique her father had taught her years earlier, she struck pressure points on both men's legs with surgical precision. The strikes looked almost gentle to the untrained observers, but they temporarily disrupted the nerve function in both men's quadriceps muscles. Thompson and Kruger hit the mat hard, and when they tried to get back up, they discovered that their legs were not responding properly. They could feel their muscles, but the strength was gone. leaving them struggling helplessly on the ground like fish out of water. The gymnasium was absolutely silent for a long moment. Nearly 300 elite military personnel sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Two of the base's most intimidating instructors had been neutralized in less than 15 seconds by someone half their size. Chief Harrison was the first to react, stepping onto the mat with a mixture of concern and amazement. "Chen, what did you do to them?" he asked, though his tone suggested professional curiosity rather than accusation. "Temporary nerve disruption, Chief," Sarah replied calmly. "They'll be fine in about 5 minutes." It's a non-permanent technique designed to end confrontations without causing lasting damage. Dr. Amanda Foster, the base medical officer who was attending the demonstration, quickly moved onto the mat to assess the situation. After a brief examination of both men, she confirmed that they were not seriously injured, just temporarily incapacitated. "Fascinating. Dr. Penwood," Foster said, looking at Sarah with professional interest. "I've read about pressure point techniques in medical journals, but I've never seen them applied so precisely. Their motor function should return gradually over the next few minutes." Thompson and Kruger were both conscious and alert, but clearly frustrated and embarrassed. They had planned to humiliate Sarah in front of everyone, and instead they were lying helpless on the mat while a medical officer explained their condition to the audience. As feeling began to return to their legs, both men struggled to sit up. The temporary paralysis was wearing off, but the psychological impact of what had happened was just beginning to set in. They had underestimated Sarah completely, and now everyone on the base would know about it. Captain Hayes, the commanding officer of the training division, stood up in the bleachers and called for attention. "That was an impressive demonstration of advanced defensive techniques," he announced. "Petty Officer Chen, would you mind explaining to everyone what just happened?" Sarah looked to Chief Harrison for permission, received a nod, and then addressed the audience. "What you just saw was an example of using an attacker's aggression against them," she explained. "When facing multiple opponents, the key is not to fight each one individually, but to use their coordination and momentum to create collisions and openings." She gestured toward Thompson and Kruger, who were now able to stand but were clearly still shaken. The pressure point strikes were used to end the confrontation quickly and safely. These techniques are designed to incapacitate without causing permanent injury. Lieutenant Colonel Williams, the visiting officer from Navy Special Warfare Command, was taking notes rapidly. She had been sent to evaluate the base's training programs, and what she had just witnessed was unlike anything she had seen in 20 years of military service. "Petty Officer Chen," Williams called out, "where did you learn these techniques?" "From my father, ma'am, who taught traditional Chinese martial arts," Sarah replied. "I've been training since I was 5 years old, and I've worked to adapt these traditional techniques for military applications." The audience began to murmur with interest and approval. What had started as an attempted humiliation had turned into an educational moment that would change how many of them thought about combat training. Thompson finally found his voice. He paused, clearly struggling with his pride and the reality of what had just happened. "That was not what we expected." Sarah turned to face him directly, her expression serious but not unkind. "Sergeant Thompson, you and Petty Officer Kruger are both skilled fighters," she said, "but you made the mistake of underestimating your opponent and coordinating attacks that could be turned against you." She stepped closer to both men, lowering her voice so that only they could hear. "I know what you were trying to do here today. I understand why you did it, and I don't take it personally. But if you ever try something like this again, the outcome will not be as gentle." The quiet threat in her voice was unmistakable, but it was delivered without anger or malice. Sarah was simply stating a fact, and both men understood that she meant every word. Kruger, who had been silent since the encounter ended, finally spoke up. "How did you know what we were planning?" he asked. Sarah smiled slightly. "Your body language, your positioning, and the way you were coordinating your movements made your intentions clear. My father taught me that the most important part of any fight happens before the first punch is thrown." Chief Harrison called for a 15-minute break in the demonstration, giving Thompson and Kruger time to fully recover and allowing the audience to discuss what they had just witnessed. As people filed out of the bleachers, the conversations were animated and impressed. Several officers approached Sarah to ask questions about her training and techniques. Master Chief Rodriguez introduced himself and expressed his admiration for her skills. Lieutenant Commander Martinez beamed with pride, knowing that her protégé had just proven herself in the most dramatic way possible. But perhaps the most significant conversation was the one Sarah had with Captain Hayes and Lieutenant Colonel Williams. Both senior officers were interested in understanding how Sarah's skills could be integrated into broader training programs. "What you demonstrated today could revolutionize how we approach hand-to-hand combat training," Williams said. "Would you be interested in developing a curriculum that teaches these techniques to other instructors?" Sarah considered the offer carefully. This was the opportunity she had been working towards since arriving at Coronado, but she wanted to make sure she approached it correctly. "I'd be honored to contribute, ma'am," Sarah said. "But I think it's important that we focus on practical applications and ensure that these techniques complement existing military training rather than replacing it." Hayes nodded approvingly.
Excellent perspective.
"We'll want to discuss this further after today's demonstration is complete." As the break ended and people returned to their seats, the atmosphere in the gymnasium had changed completely. Sarah was no longer the unknown quantity who needed to prove herself. She was now recognized as someone with unique and valuable skills who could contribute significantly to the base's training programs. Thompson and Kruger returned to the mat for the second half of their demonstration, but their approach was markedly different. Gone was the arrogance and swagger that had characterized their earlier behavior. They conducted their remaining demonstrations professionally and without incident, but everyone could see that their confidence had been shaken. The rest of the day's demonstrations proceeded smoothly, but nothing else came close to the drama and impact of what had happened between Sarah, Thompson, and Kruger. The story was already spreading throughout the base, growing and evolving as it passed from person to person. By evening, word of the incident had reached every corner of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Sarah Chen, the quiet petty officer who had been underestimated by almost everyone, had become the most talked-about person on the base, but more importantly, she had established herself as someone whose skills and knowledge could benefit everyone there. The double kick that was supposed to bring her down had instead elevated her to a position of respect and authority that she had never expected. And this was only the beginning of how her actions that day would change everything. Within hours of the demonstration, the story of Sarah Chen and her encounter with Thompson and Kruger had spread far beyond Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. In the age of smartphones and social media, word traveled fast through military networks, and by evening, personnel at bases across the country were hearing about the petite petty officer who had taken down 2 intimidating instructors in front of nearly 300 Navy SEALs. The story grew with each telling, as military stories often do. Some versions had Sarah defeating 5 attackers instead of 2. Others claimed she had used ancient Chinese secrets that no one had ever seen before. But the core facts remained consistent. A small woman had used superior skill and training to defeat 2 much larger opponents who had clearly underestimated her. At Coronado, the immediate aftermath of the demonstration was both chaotic and transformative. Chief Harrison found himself fielding calls from senior officers who wanted to know more about Sarah's background and capabilities. Captain Hayes had already scheduled a meeting with her for the following morning to discuss expanding her role in the training program. Most significantly, Lieutenant Colonel Williams had postponed her departure to spend additional time evaluating Sarah's techniques and their potential applications. Williams was responsible for developing training standards across multiple Navy installations, and what she had witnessed suggested possibilities that could impact thousands of personnel. But the most immediate change was in how other personnel at the base viewed and interacted with Sarah. Where there had once been skepticism and dismissal, there was now curiosity and respect. People who had barely acknowledged her presence were now seeking her out to ask questions and learn from her experience. The reaction was not uniformly positive, however. Some personnel, particularly those who were close to Thompson and Kruger, viewed Sarah's actions as unnecessarily aggressive and embarrassing to 2 respected instructors. They argued that she had taken advantage of a training situation to show off and humiliate colleagues who had been trying to include her in their demonstration. Petty Officer Martinez, a friend of Kruger's, was particularly vocal in his criticism. "She made them look like fools in front of everyone," Martinez complained to anyone who would listen. "There was no reason to embarrass them like that. It was supposed to be a training demonstration, not a chance for her to show off." This perspective found some support among personnel who believed that unit cohesion was more important than individual recognition. They argued that Sarah should have been more collaborative and less confrontational, regardless of what Thompson and Kruger had planned. But these voices were quickly overwhelmed by those who had recognized what really happened during the demonstration. Master Chief Rodriguez, whose opinion carried significant weight on the base, was unequivocal in his support for Sarah's actions. Those 2 set her up for public humiliation, Rodriguez told anyone who suggested Sarah had been out of line. They thought they could embarrass her in front of everyone, and instead they learned a valuable lesson about respect. She handled it perfectly. The debate about Sarah's actions reflected a larger conversation happening throughout the military about changing standards, evolving expectations, and the integration of diverse skills and perspectives. Her demonstration had become a symbol for many different viewpoints about what the modern military should look like. Meanwhile, Thompson and Kruger were dealing with their own aftermath from the incident. Both men were experienced enough to understand that their reputations had been seriously damaged by what had happened. They had been seen as experts in hand-to-hand combat, and their inability to handle Sarah had called that expertise into question. Thompson was the more vocal of the two in processing the experience. "I've been thinking about what happened," he told Kruger over dinner in the base cafeteria. "We made a mistake, and not just tactically. We underestimated her completely." Kruger nodded glumly. "The whole base is talking about it. Some of the guys are already asking us how it feels to get beaten up by a girl." The comment reflected the unfortunate gender dynamics that still existed in some parts of the military culture. But Thompson's response surprised his partner. "Maybe that's exactly the attitude we need to change," he said. "We called her techniques fancy martial arts moves and dismissed her because of her size. We were wrong about everything." This was a significant admission from someone who had built his reputation on traditional military toughness and conventional approaches to combat training. Thompson was beginning to understand that his encounter with Sarah had exposed not just tactical weaknesses but conceptual limitations in how he thought about fighting and training. Over the following days, both men found themselves in an uncomfortable position. Some personnel treated them with sympathy, viewing them as victims of Sarah's aggressive display. Others seemed to question their competence and credentials. The uncertainty about how they were perceived made their daily interactions awkward and strained. The situation came to a head 3 days after the demonstration, when Thompson made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He approached Sarah during her morning workout session and asked to speak with her privately. "I need to say something to you," Thompson began, his usual confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. "What happened the other day, I want you to know that it wasn't supposed to be a fair demonstration. We set you up, and you had every right to defend yourself." Sarah stopped her workout and gave Thompson her full attention. She had been expecting this conversation in some form, but she was curious about what he actually wanted to say. "I appreciate you acknowledging that," Sarah replied carefully. "But I'm more interested in moving forward than dwelling on what happened." Thompson nodded. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Kruger and I have been discussing this, and we think we were wrong about more than just tactics. We dismissed your training and experience because it was different from ours." He paused, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say next. "Would you be willing to teach us some of what you know? Not to embarrass us further, but because we realized we have things to learn." This request was the last thing Sarah had expected. Thompson and Kruger had been her most vocal critics, and the idea that they wanted to learn from her seemed almost surreal.
Are you serious?
Sarah asked. 3 days ago, you were telling an audience of 300 people that my techniques were ineffective. 3 days ago, I was an idiot. Thompson replied bluntly. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about fighting. You showed me that I was wrong, and I'd rather learn from that than keep making the same mistakes." Sarah considered his request carefully. There were good reasons to be suspicious of Thompson's motives, but there were also potential benefits to building a working relationship with two influential instructors. More importantly, teaching them would advance her goal of integrating traditional martial arts techniques into military training. "I'm willing to work with you," Sarah said finally. "But I have some conditions. First, this has to be a genuine learning experience, not an attempt to find weaknesses in my techniques. Second, we work as equals, not as instructor and students. And third, if this is going to happen, it needs to include other people so that the knowledge gets shared more broadly." Thompson agreed immediately.
Those terms are more than fair.
"When do we start?" The announcement that Thompson and Kruger would be training with Sarah created another wave of discussion throughout the base. Some people saw it as a positive development that would benefit everyone involved. Others viewed it as a further humiliation for two instructors who should have maintained their dignity by avoiding any association with Sarah. Chief Harrison was delighted by the development. He had been concerned about the long-term effects of the confrontation on unit cohesion, and the willingness of all parties to move forward constructively addressed many of his worries. "This is exactly what we hoped would happen when we brought Sarah into the program,"
Harrison told Captain Hayes.
"She's not just demonstrating techniques, she's changing how people think about combat training." Hayes agreed, but he also recognized that Sarah's growing influence brought new responsibilities and challenges. "We need to be careful about how we manage this," he said.
"She's becoming a symbol for a lot of different ideas about military training, and that kind of attention can be dangerous."
The first joint training session took place the following week in a small gymnasium that allowed for privacy, while still accommodating the group of 12 personnel who had requested to participate.
Word of the session had spread, and demand for inclusion far exceeded the available space. Sarah had spent considerable time planning the session to ensure that it would be educational rather than confrontational. She wanted to demonstrate techniques that would be useful in military contexts while also showing respect for the existing expertise of the participants. The session began with Sarah explaining the philosophical foundations of traditional martial arts and how they could complement conventional military training. She emphasized that effective fighting was not about strength or aggression, but about understanding timing, distance, and leverage. The goal is not to overpower an opponent, but to use their own energy against them, Sarah explained. This is especially important in military contexts where you might face multiple attackers or situations where firearms are not available. She then demonstrated basic principles using Thompson as her partner. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone present. 3 weeks earlier, Thompson had been trying to humiliate Sarah, and now he was helping her teach techniques to other personnel. But Thompson's participation was genuine and enthusiastic. He followed Sarah's instructions carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and demonstrated real interest in understanding the principles behind the techniques. His transformation from skeptic to student was remarkable and influenced how others viewed the training. "This is completely different from what I expected," Thompson told the group during a break. "I thought martial arts was about memorizing complicated moves, but this is about understanding principles that apply to any fighting situation." Kruger was equally impressed. "The pressure point technique she showed us could be incredibly useful in situations where you need to subdue someone without causing permanent damage," he said. "We've been trying to solve that problem with equipment and restraint techniques, but this approach is much more elegant." The success of the first session led to requests for additional training, and soon Sarah found herself conducting regular classes for base personnel. The classes were voluntary but consistently well attended, with participants ranging from junior enlisted personnel to senior officers. Lieutenant Colonel Williams attended several of these sessions as part of her extended evaluation of the base's training programs. She was particularly interested in how traditional martial arts techniques could be standardized and integrated into official training curricula. "What Sarah is doing here could have implications far beyond Coronado," Williams told Captain Hayes. "We're talking about a fundamental shift in how the Navy approaches hand-to-hand combat training."
The implications extended beyond just fighting techniques.
Sarah's approach emphasized mental discipline, situational awareness, and conflict de-escalation in addition to physical skills. These elements addressed broader concerns about military training that focused primarily on aggression and domination. Dr. Foster, the base medical officer, became particularly interested in the medical applications of Sarah's knowledge. "The pressure point techniques could be valuable for medical personnel who need to restrain patients safely," she observed. "And the breathing and meditation aspects could help with stress management and mental health, but perhaps the most significant impact was on the culture of the training division itself." The success of Sarah's classes and the transformation of Thompson and Kruger had created an atmosphere that was more open to different approaches and perspectives. Personnel were more willing to admit what they did not know and more eager to learn from unexpected sources. The change was not universal, and there remained some resistance to what critics called the softening of military training. But the results spoke for themselves. Personnel who had trained with Sarah showed improved performance in combat simulations, better teamwork in stressful situations, and reduced injury rates during training exercises. 6 weeks after the demonstration that had made her famous, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Her father, Master Chen Wei, had driven down from Oregon to see how his daughter was doing in her new role. "I've been hearing interesting stories about you," Chen Wei told Sarah as they walked around the base. "It sounds like you are finally using your training for its intended purpose." Sarah smiled. "I think you would be proud of what we're accomplishing here. We're showing people that there are many different ways to be strong." Chen Wei nodded approvingly. That was always the goal. Strength that comes from understanding rather than force. Confidence that comes from skill rather than size. As they talked, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that morning when Thompson and Kruger had tried to humiliate her. What they had intended as an ending had become a beginning, not just for her career, but for a new approach to military training that was already spreading beyond Coronado. The double kick that was meant to bring her down had instead launched her into a role she had never imagined but was perfectly suited for, and the ripple effects of that moment were continuing to spread in ways that no one could have predicted. 6 months after the demonstration, that changed everything. Naval Amphibious Base Coronado had become the most requested assignment for personnel interested in advanced combat training. Word had spread throughout the Navy about the innovative program being developed there, and the waiting list for Sarah's specialized courses had grown to over 200 applicants. The transformation had been remarkable and swift. What started as one woman's response to attempted humiliation had evolved into a comprehensive reimagining of how the military approached hand-to-hand combat training. Sarah found herself at the center of changes that were affecting policies and procedures across multiple military branches. Lieutenant Colonel Williams had returned to Navy Special Warfare Command with recommendations that would eventually reshape training standards throughout the entire Navy. Her report described Sarah's methods as revolutionary and essential for modern military preparedness. More importantly, she had documented measurable improvements in combat effectiveness among personnel who had completed Sarah's training. The numbers were impressive. Personnel who had trained with Sarah showed a 40% improvement in close-quarters combat simulations, a 30% reduction in training injuries, and significantly better performance in scenarios requiring conflict de-escalation. These results had caught the attention of senior leadership throughout the military. Captain Hayes had been promoted to Admiral and given oversight of training standardization for the entire Navy Special Warfare Command. His first initiative was to establish the Chen method, as it had become known, as an official component of advanced military training. Sarah found herself promoted to Chief Petty Officer and designated as the primary instructor for the new program. The promotion ceremony was held in the same gymnasium where Sarah had faced Thompson and Kruger 6 months earlier. As she stood before an audience of senior officers and colleagues, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Chief Chen, Admiral Hayes said as he pinned her new insignia, "You have demonstrated that innovation and tradition can work together to create something greater than either could achieve alone. Your contributions to military training will benefit thousands of personnel for years to come." The audience applauded, but Sarah's attention was drawn to several specific faces in the crowd. Thompson and Kruger sat in the front row, both of whom had become her most dedicated students and were now certified instructors in her methods themselves. Their transformation from antagonists to allies had become one of the most talked about aspects of the entire program. Master Chief Rodriguez had become one of Sarah's strongest advocates and was instrumental in helping to implement her training methods across the base. His endorsement had been crucial in gaining acceptance from senior enlisted personnel who might have been skeptical of such radical changes to traditional training. Dr. Foster had collaborated with Sarah to develop medical applications of pressure point techniques and was preparing to publish research papers on the therapeutic benefits of martial arts training for military personnel. Their work was attracting attention from medical professionals throughout the military. But perhaps most significantly, Chief Harrison had been selected to head a new joint service training center that would spread Sarah's methods to other branches of the military. Army, Marine, and Air Force personnel were already sending representatives to Coronado to learn about the Chen method. Sarah's father, Master Chen Wei, had become a regular visitor to the base, serving as a consultant on traditional martial arts philosophy and techniques. His presence provided valuable cultural context and helped ensure that the military applications remained true to the original principles of the arts. "I am proud of what you have accomplished," Chen Wei told his daughter after the promotion ceremony. "But I am more proud of how you have accomplished it. You have shown that strength does not require dominance, and that teaching is more powerful than defeating." The growth of Sarah's influence brought new challenges and responsibilities. She was now responsible for training instructors who would teach her methods at bases across the country. The pressure to maintain quality while scaling up the program was enormous, and Sarah found herself working longer hours than ever before. One of her biggest challenges was ensuring that the Chen method remained effective as it spread beyond her direct control. She had seen too many good ideas lose their effectiveness when they were simplified or misunderstood by people who did not fully grasp the underlying principles. To address this concern, Sarah developed a comprehensive certification program that required potential instructors to demonstrate not just technical proficiency, but also understanding of the philosophical foundations of the training. The program was rigorous, with a failure rate of nearly 40%, but it ensured that only qualified personnel would be teaching her methods. Thompson and Kruger were among the first to complete the certification program, and their success stories became powerful testimonials for the effectiveness of the training. Both men had become completely different instructors, emphasizing technique over intimidation and collaboration over domination. Sarah didn't just teach us new fighting techniques, Thompson explained to a group of visiting officers. She taught us a completely different way of thinking about strength, respect, and leadership. I'm a better instructor now, and more importantly, I'm a better person. Kruger's transformation was equally dramatic. The man who had once relied on intimidation and aggression had become known for his patience and ability to help struggling students overcome their limitations. His classes were among the most popular on the base, and his students consistently achieved excellent results. I used to think that being tough meant being hard, Kruger reflected during an interview for a military training publication. Now I understand that real toughness comes from being adaptable, disciplined, and always willing to learn. Sarah taught me that lesson in about 15 seconds, and it changed my entire career. The success stories extended far beyond the original participants. Personnel who had completed Sarah's training were being promoted at higher rates than their peers, showing improved leadership qualities and receiving recognition for their problem-solving abilities and calm under pressure. Major Lisa Patterson, an Army officer who had completed the instructor certification program, reported remarkable results when she implemented the Chen method at Fort Bragg. Our soldiers are not just better fighters, Patterson noted. They're more confident, more disciplined, and better able to work as a team. The training addresses the mental and emotional aspects of combat, not just the physical techniques. The international implications of Sarah's work were also beginning to emerge. Allied military forces had expressed interest in learning about the Chen method, and there were preliminary discussions about including it in joint training exercises with British, Canadian, and Australian forces. Sarah found herself traveling frequently to conduct training sessions and consultations at various military installations. Each trip provided opportunities to refine her methods based on different environments and challenges, but it also meant time away from her home base and the colleagues who had become like family to her. During one such trip to Naval Air Station Norfolk, Sarah encountered a situation that reminded her why her work was so important. A young sailor, Seaman Jennifer Walsh, approached her after a training demonstration with a story that was all too familiar. "Chief Chen," Walsh said nervously, "I've been having problems with some of the other sailors. They think I don't belong here because I'm small and they don't take me seriously. Some of them have been pretty aggressive about it." Sarah recognized the situation immediately. Walsh was facing the same kind of intimidation and dismissal that Sarah herself had experienced, and that countless other service members encountered every day. The difference was that now there were tools and techniques available to address these problems constructively. "Tell me more about what's been happening," Sarah said, giving Walsh her full attention. Walsh described a pattern of harassment and intimidation that was unfortunately common in military environments, where size and aggression were often mistakenly equated with competence and leadership. Several larger sailors had been making her life difficult, questioning her abilities, and excluding her from group activities. "They keep saying that I need to prove myself," Walsh explained. "But every time I try to show what I can do, they change the rules or find some other way to dismiss it." Sarah nodded understandingly. "What you're describing is exactly why this training exists. It's not just about fighting techniques. It's about building the kind of confidence that comes from genuine skill and the ability to stand up for yourself and others when necessary." Over the next 2 days, Sarah worked intensively with Walsh, teaching her basic techniques, but also helping her understand the mental and emotional aspects of dealing with intimidation. The training was not about encouraging confrontation, but about building the kind of quiet confidence that would command respect. When Sarah returned to Norfolk 3 months later for a follow-up visit, she was pleased to discover that Walsh had become one of the station's most respected sailors. She had used her training not to fight with the sailors who had been harassing her, but to demonstrate competence and leadership that had earned their respect. "The techniques you taught me were important," Walsh told Sarah, "but the confidence was what really made the difference. I stopped trying to prove myself and started just being myself. Once I did that, everything changed." Stories like Walsh's were becoming common throughout the military as the Chen method spread to new installations. Personnel were discovering that the training provided tools for dealing with a wide range of challenges beyond just physical confrontation. The psychological benefits of the training were as significant as the physical ones. Personnel reported improved stress management, better sleep, and reduced anxiety. The meditation and breathing techniques that were integral to Sarah's methods were helping service members deal with the mental health challenges that were unfortunately common in military life. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a military psychologist who had studied the effects of Sarah's training, published research showing measurable improvements in mental health indicators among participants. "The Chen method addresses the whole person," Hendricks wrote, providing tools for physical protection, emotional regulation, and mental discipline. As Sarah's second year at Coronado drew to a close, she received an unexpected opportunity that would test everything she had built. The Secretary of the Navy personally requested that she develop a training program for senior military leaders, including generals and admirals, who needed to understand how these new methods could be integrated into military policy. The assignment was both an honor and a challenge. Teaching techniques to junior personnel was one thing, But helping senior leaders understand the strategic implications of new training methods required different skills and approaches. Sarah spent months preparing for the assignment, working with Admiral Hayes and other senior officers to develop a curriculum that would be appropriate for flag-level personnel. The challenge was presenting complex martial arts concepts in ways that would be meaningful to leaders who were focused on policy and strategy rather than individual techniques. The senior leadership seminar was held at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. Participants included admirals, generals, and senior civilian officials from across the Department of Defense. The pressure was enormous, but Sarah was prepared. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began her presentation, "what we're discussing today is not just about new fighting techniques. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how the military thinks about strength, leadership, and the development of human potential." Over the course of 3 days, Sarah demonstrated how her methods could address some of the military's most persistent challenges, reducing training injuries, improving unit cohesion, developing adaptive leaders, and preparing personnel for the complex conflicts of the modern world. The response was overwhelmingly positive. General Patricia Morrison, the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, called the program transformational and announced plans to implement it throughout Army training facilities. Admiral Jonathan Hayes declared it essential for maintaining military readiness in the 21st century. But perhaps the most significant endorsement came from Secretary of the Navy Robert Anderson, who announced the establishment of the Center for Advanced Military Training at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, with Sarah as its first director. "Chief Chen has shown us that innovation and tradition can work together to create something greater than either could achieve alone," Secretary Anderson declared. "The Center for Advanced Military Training will ensure that her methods become a permanent part of how we prepare our sailors and Marines for the challenges they will face." As Sarah stood before the assembly of senior military leaders, receiving recognition for achievements that would have been impossible to imagine just 2 years earlier, she thought about the moment that had started everything. Thompson and Kruger's attempt to humiliate her had instead launched a transformation that was affecting thousands of military personnel. The double kick that was supposed to bring her down had instead elevated not just her own career, but the entire approach to military training. What had begun as one woman's response to attempted intimidation had become a new standard for excellence that would benefit generations of service members. Looking back, Sarah realized that Thompson and Kruger had actually done her a favor, though certainly not in the way they had intended. Their underestimation of her had provided the perfect demonstration of why the military needed to change its thinking about strength, skill, and leadership. As she prepared to take on her new role as director of the Center for Advanced Military Training, Sarah was grateful for the journey that had brought her to this point. The quiet girl from Oregon who had learned ancient fighting techniques in her father's small studio had become a leader in transforming how one of the world's most powerful military forces prepared its personnel. The story of what happened that day in front of 282 Navy SEALs had become legend, but the real impact was in the thousands of lives that had been changed by what followed. Sarah Chen had shown that true strength comes not from the ability to intimidate others, but from the wisdom to lift them up. And that lesson was now becoming part of the foundation upon which the modern military would build its future.